What a difference a few weeks makes. Before President Biden dropped out of the presidential race, that was 3 weeks ago today, Democrats were discouraged. Republicans were on a roll, and it looked like Donald Trump was well on his way to winning back the White House. Now, a new New York Times Siena poll of the battleground states likely to determine who will win shows that the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz ticket has the momentum, leading Trump-Vance by 4 points among likely voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. That's a dramatic change after what the Times is calling the worst 3 weeks of Donald Trump's 2024 campaign. After a rough start as Trump's running mate, JD Vance is now leading the Republican effort to define the Harris-Walz ticket and to regain the momentum. I caught up with him this weekend at his home state of Ohio. We started with the state of the race. Thank you for joining us, Senator Vance. So,
thanks for being here.
I saw Kamala Harris said that she's the underdog in this race. Is that the way you see it? I mean, are you guys still the front runners here?
Look, I think that we are going to have a very tight election, John, and that we just have to sprint to the finish line. We have about 88 days to actually persuade the American people that President Trump should be their president and be their vice president. And I think you just take nothing for granted. You don't believe any polls, whether the ones that are good for you or bad for you. You just try to persuade people as much as you can, and the chips are going to fall where they are.
But Trump seems to think that he's got a huge lead. I mean, you said this at the press conference. He suggested it could be a landslide looking at polls. Do you tell him that you need to kind of like temper expectations?
I think President Trump is extremely confident. Look, I'm extremely confident. I think we're going to win. I also think that we have to work as hard as possible for the remainder of the election to try to persuade Americans to vote for us. That's the name of the game. But yeah, look, do I think President Trump is actually as confident as he pretends to be in public? Yes, he actually is. But we still have to work very hard.
So there's been a lot of talk about racism and whatnot. You faced some really nasty stuff. I saw this thing that Nick Fuentes, of course, he's an avowed white supremacist. He said, what kind of a man marries somebody named Usha? Clearly he doesn't value his racial identity, his heritage. I mean, this is racist garbage.
Yes, it is.
But this is also a guy that dined with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago during this campaign.
Well, and that Donald Trump doesn't know anything about and frankly doesn't care for. But yeah, look, my attitude to these people attacking my wife is she's beautiful, she's smart. What kind of man marries Usha? A very smart man and a very lucky man, importantly. And my view is, look, if these guys want to attack me or attack my views, my policy views, my personality, come after me. But don't attack my wife. She's out of your league.
But, I mean, that dinner that Trump had, and of course it was Kanye West, the guy that's praised Hitler, who arranged it all, that was back a year and a half ago, and Trump still hasn't given a full-throated denouncement of this guy who said that terrible stuff, but he said, I mean, he's a white supremacist.
Look, I think President Trump has issued plenty of condemnations on this. The one thing that I like, the one thing I like about Donald Trump, John, is that he actually will talk to anybody. But just because you talk to somebody doesn't mean you endorse their views. And look, I mean, Donald Trump spent a lot of quality time with my wife. Every time he sees her, he gives her a hug, tells her she's beautiful, and jokes around with her a little bit. I'm not at all worried about Donald Trump. I'm worried sometimes about these ridiculous attacks. But again, this is what you sign up for when you come into politics. I wish people would keep it focused on me, but whatever. They're going to say what they're going to say. My wife's tough enough to handle it, and that's a good thing.
All right, let's focus on something that's gotten a lot of attention. I mean, you know, this cat ladies comment. You talk about Democrat Party dominated by childish cat ladies. Put that aside. You also made a policy proposal.
Yes.
Which was why Tucker Carlson had you on for that interview. And you said you advocated giving extra votes to people with children, which seems a little...
Well, John, it's not a policy proposal. It's a thought experiment, right? Democrats said we should give children the right to vote. Some Democrats had said we're going to give children the right to vote. And I said, well, if we're going to give the rights to the children, then we should actually just allow the parents to cast those votes, right? I trust a parent more with a decision like that than I do, say, a 14-year-old. So it's a thought experiment. There are, though, policy positions behind my view that the country should become more pro-family, right? One thing I learned as a dad is after our second child we brought home, we have 3 little kids, we got these ridiculous surprise medical billings from the hospital because we had chosen an out-of-network provider, of course, at this most stressful of all imaginable moments. I've actually introduced legislation to stop moms and dads from having to go through those surprise medical billings. We want to expand the child tax credit. There's so much that we want to do, John, to make the country more pro-family. And I think it is frankly shameful shameful that the Harris administration has lied about what I actually said. Look, sometimes family doesn't work out for people, and that's okay. But I do think that Kamala Harris herself has pursued some anti-family policies, and that is a problem and something we ought to push back against.
So I put aside whatever other people. I mean, I listened to your entire speech. I
Please.
listened to the whole thing, and I saw. And you did say you weren't talking about people who physically can't have children. I mean, that's not what you were saying.
Well, and sometimes it just doesn't work out, right?
And it didn't work out. You did say that. You called it throat clearing, I think. You said, look, I'm not talking about that. But you did
because
say,
I knew people would try to misrepresent it, so it's important to be clear.
Let's look at what you exactly said. You
Please.
said, when you go to the polls in this country as a parent, you should have more power. You should have more of an ability to speak your voice in a democratic republic than the people who don't have kids. I mean, you are directly saying that people with kids should have more of a voice in our democracy. Thought experiment or not about how that is done, but that is the principle. And I mean, I could read on, but you are expressing a principle here.
Again, John, it's a thought experiment. I've been a senator for 2 years. Have I proposed any legislation to that effect? Of course not. Sometimes people make remarks in response to something that somebody else has said. If it was a policy proposal, I would have made the policy proposal in my 2 years in the United States Senate. Now, I do think, John, to be clear here, because I think it's important to focus on what I actually said, I do think becoming a parent affects you in a very profound way. I've seen friends of mine, certainly in my own life, becoming a father does really give you this incredible perspective. You have this little life that you have to take care of. It's an amazing thing, and it does make you think differently about your responsibilities. So yeah, I absolutely do think that being a parent changes you in a profound way. I do not think that we ought to be changing the way that we do votes in this country. I was responding to a Democratic proposal in a very, very thought experiment way.
And you predicted that you would get attacked. You said, I'm sure the Atlantic, the Washington Post will come out and say, well, doesn't this mean non-parents don't have as much of a voice as parents? Doesn't it mean that parents get a bigger say in how our democracy functions? Yes, absolutely. So do you regret saying that? You take that back?
Look, John, again, I'm talking about a thought experiment here, and do I regret saying it? I regret that the media and the Kamala Harris campaign has frankly distorted what I said.
How's that distorting what I just read your words? How's that distorting what you said?
Because they have turned this into a policy proposal that I never made, John. I said I want us to be more pro-family, and I do want us to be more pro-family. And I do think, look, when you're a parent and you have children, you obviously have a different perspective, and I said that too, and I certainly believe that. But I think that the idea, John, that I actually want to change the American voting system to give 12-year-olds the right to vote and then to give control over it to their parents, it's ridiculous. I never said that. I was responding to a Democratic line.
Okay. I mean, it was a speech on the. Anyway, we'll people. The speech is online. People can
Please,
watch the
but in the beginning, John, I say Democrats have proposed giving these rights to children. I say if we're going to give them to children, let the parents cast that vote.
So I want to ask you about abortion. There's this proposed amendment that's going to be on the ballot in Florida that basically codifies a constitutional right, state constitutional right, to have an abortion up to about 24 weeks. I assume this is something you oppose.
Well, what I believe, and I'm running to be the vice president of the United States, is that the American people have to make this decision. And President Trump has said explicitly they're going to make this decision on a state-by-state level. He won the nomination of our party. He's determined what the platform is. And I think that he's doing something that's actually very, very important, which is to try to help the country find some common ground. Look, California is going to have a less restrictive abortion policy than Ohio, where we're sitting. Ohio is going to have a less restrictive abortion policy than Alabama. I think the people have to make these decisions, and that's the way for us to come together as a country over a very tough issue.
But this should be, I assume this is an easy one for you. I mean, you've been very clear about how you feel about abortion. I mean, if you've compared it to slavery.
I didn't compare it to slavery, John.
The impact on the society to slavery, yes.
Ask the question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, just again, the idea of codifying, whatever the state, codifying a right to abortion up to about 24 weeks, isn't that something you oppose?
Well, look, in Ohio, we had a referendum in the state, and
you made your position clear.
and I aggressively advocated for the pro-life view because I want to save as many babies as possible. Also importantly, John, the people of Ohio decided by about a 60-40 margin to reject the pro-life framing and you have to respect the will of the people. That's all that Donald Trump has said. That's what I believe. And as someone who really does want to say, John, I do want us to become a more pro-family country. I want us to have more babies and more families. I want our neighborhoods to be filled with the laughter of children and thriving families. We and the pro-life community, I think, have to figure out how to better make our case to the American people and how to make it easier to have a baby. It's way too expensive. Housing is through the roof. Medical costs are through the roof. President Trump and I have actually advanced a series of policies that would make it easier for us to have families. I think that's where we're focused on as a presidential ticket. And as the president has said, on abortion policy specifically, the states are going to make up their minds.
And Donald Trump's going to have a chance to vote on that, and he says he's going to offer his position, didn't say what it was. Would you be disappointed if Donald Trump says that he supports a constitutional right to abortion?
I'll let Donald Trump offer his position, and I'll talk about it then.
What would you encourage him to do on that, though? I mean, this is a pretty fundamental idea for you. I mean,
John,
you've been such a leader in the pro-life movement.
What I would encourage him to do is to do what he's done up to this point, which is to try to find some common ground here and try to advance some pro-family policy so that people feel like they have more options, right? A lot of the reason that women choose to terminate a pregnancy is very often they don't feel like they have any other choice. We want to give them more options to choose to have that baby, to make it easier to raise that baby. I think Donald Trump has shown real leadership by focusing on that and not on the culture war topic of what each individual state's abortion policy should be.
You've said that Donald Trump is the greatest president of your lifetime.
He is.
Who, in your mind, is the greatest vice president of your lifetime?
It's a good question. I haven't thought much about that. I think George H.W. Bush did a very good job as vice president. You could pick a number of guys who have done a perfectly fine job, but the president really sets the tone for policy, and I think a lot more about the president than about the vice president. And fundamentally, my role in the administration is to support him in enacting the agenda. That's what I'm going to work on.
Trump was asked recently very directly, would you be ready to be president on day one?
Sure.
When you'd arrived? And it was notable that he didn't answer the question. Instead, what he said is, the vice presidential candidate doesn't matter. I mean, what did you make when you heard him not answer that directly?
Well, he said that a million times, both in private and in public.
But he's asked really directly,
right.
Are you ready?
Most people, oh, come on, John. He's right. Most people, 99% of the country, they don't vote on who the vice presidential nominee. They're voting for Donald Trump or for Kamala Harris, not for JD or Tim Walz, right? But what I think that he does believe, because he made it the main focus of his vetting process, is, do I think this person can be president on day one if, God forbid, something happens? Yes. So I absolutely am sure that Donald Trump is confident in my abilities. I also think that he's right, that the politics of this really don't matter that much.
One of the proposals that's in the platform, you've talked about it, Trump's talked about it, is a mass deportation. Now, I know he said, you'll start with the easy ones, the criminals, people commit crimes, deport them. But he said deporting 15 to 20 million people. How do you actually do that?
Well, John, we have to start with the fact that we have a wide open southern border because our border czar actually set a lot of open border policies. They suspended.
You know, she wasn't the border czar.
Oh, that was what the media called her. She assumed the title. She had control over a lot of our border policy at a time
what was the
when they were suspending.
Let
me finish, John. The time they were suspending deportations,
yeah.
They stopped Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, and they reinstituted catch and release. They basically threw open the gates of our country, and now we have a ton of fentanyl, a ton of people
but
suffering.
But how are you going to get 10 to 15 to 20 million people
out of the country? Well, the
first
thing you have to do is to stop the bleeding, stop the open border, get Kamala Harris out of there, and actually re-implement the Remain in Mexico policy, rebuild or finish Donald Trump's border wall, and you do that and you stop the bleeding. Now, you're right. Once you do that, once you stop Kamala Harris's open border policies, you've got to do something with the people who are already here. And I think that you take a sequential approach to it. You are going to have to deport some people. If you're not willing to deport a lot of people, you're not willing to have a border when there are 20 million illegal aliens in our country.
10 to 15 million people, this is like, I mean...
Well, John, I think that's the wrong attitude to take of it. Okay,
so you go knock on doors and ask people for their papers.
Again, but
what do you do?
Let me finish. I think this is the wrong attitude towards it, right? There's 20 million people here illegally. You start with what's achievable. You do that. and then you go on to what's achievable from there. I think that if you deport a lot of violent criminals, and frankly, if you make it harder to hire illegal labor, which undercuts the wages of American workers, I think you go a lot of the way to solving the illegal immigration problem. But look, President Trump is absolutely right. You cannot have a border unless you're willing to deport some people. I think it's interesting that people focus on, well, how do you deport 18 million people? Let's start with 1 million. That's where Kamala Harris has failed, and then we can go from there.
And finally, before you go, you commit to this race to kind of sticking to the facts. I mean, I heard Donald Trump give this speech in Montana he just gave, and he said that Tim Walz has signed a letter letting the state kidnap children to change their gender, that allowing pedophiles to claim, I mean, to be exempt from crimes. I mean, this is not true. It's not remotely true.
Well, what President Trump said, and I haven't watched the whole rally.
What he said was not true.
What President Trump said, John, is that Tim Walz has supported taking children from their parents if the parents don't consent to gender reassignment. That is crazy. And by the way, Tim Walz gets on his high horse about mind your own damn business. One way of minding your own damn business, John, is to not try to take my children away from me if I have different moral views than you.
He has not signed a law allowing the state to kidnap children to change their sexual identity.
What I just explained to you, I would describe as kidnapping, John. He has absolutely done this stuff. It's not crazy, John. Come on.
It's not what
you should not be able to take people's children away from them.
And that's not what he's proposed.
If you disagree with decisions about gender reassignment, yes, he has proposed that, John. He absolutely has. Now, here's the more important thing, John. Why are we talking about inflation? Why are we talking about the fact that groceries are unaffordable thanks to Kamala Harris's policies, and so is housing? We've talked a little bit about the border. Why are we talking about the fact that the entire world is on fire because Kamala Harris's foreign policy, she's just asleep at the wheel? We have a set of plans. You talk about sticking to the facts. Donald Trump and I have a set of plans to lower the cost of housing and food, to bring peace back to the world with American leadership. That is all that we want to do. And I think it's telling that the Harris administration is focused so much on these side issues instead of on the real substance of why Americans are unhappy with Kamala Harris's leadership.
To be clear, I just asked you about something that Donald Trump brought up, not something that the Harris campaign brought up. I was asking you about Donald Trump's
No, I'm
words.
saying
thank you.
But John, the Harris campaign, what are their policy views? They don't have a policy position on their website. Should she sit down and answer tough questions with you?
Yes,
I think she should.
Absolutely.
Where is she?
Well,
but we respect the American people enough.
We hope she'll be on the show soon.
I hope so too, John, because the person who wants to be our president ought to sit down for some tough interviews. I'm willing to do it, and I wish she would too.
All right, JD Vance, thank you for your time. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
John.
it.
Appreciate it, man.
Our thanks to Senator Vance.